Hello and welcome to H2View webinars, a brand new series of thought leadership platforms designed to bring the hydrogen discussion, debate and insight direct to you. And could there be a better time to be launching these webinars? The hydrogen sector has more momentum and influential stakeholders than ever before. The technologies and infrastructure build-out continue to accelerate, and we've just seen confirmation of the long-awaited EU hydrogen strategy. Yet there's still so much to be discussed and debated, to be championed and challenged, particularly in the wake of a coronavirus pandemic which has shaken our economies to their very core. And that's where we begin this new webinar series, titled Hydrogen, Driven, Not Diminished. Across the series, we'll address the continued significance of hydrogen in the clean energies transition, and the technologies and the scale-up required in the future. But here today we get to grips with one of the biggest talking points in the hydrogen and clean energy space right now, the importance of hydrogen in a post-coronavirus world. And we're going to dive straight into that big story of the last fortnight, the launch of the EU's hydrogen strategy, with Bart Biebuyck of the FCHJU, that's the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. Bart, thanks for joining us today during what is no doubt a busier than ever time for you and the FCHJU. Tell us, how significant is this new hydrogen strategy and what does it mean for Europe?
Well, I mean, that was for us, that was a fantastic news for the hydrogen strategy. Of course, we have been working hard on that, but it was kind of, I would say, the cherry on the cake, because we worked since 2008 in the research agendas from the European Union, 12 years. And finally, it's nice to see that these results, after 12 years of research and demonstrations, finally start to bear fruits and will now be taken up and really to commercialize and bring it at bigger scales. And this is what the hydrogen strategy will have to do. And to be in more detail, the hydrogen strategy itself, I mean, it's 3 phases. Some of you probably have already read it, but the first phase is until 2024 with the 6 gigawatt of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers that need to be placed. By then also what we would like to try is to replace the existing hydrogen production. So you know that's a lot about steam methane reforming today. So this we need to green. So this will take place now in the first couple of years. We need to find regulation on liquid hydrogen markets, how we will do that, and also planning really the hydrogen infrastructure, the hydrogen refueling stations, the ports, and so on. That will happen until 2024 in the first phase. When we then look into the second phase in 2030, there we will need to put 40 gigawatt of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers. We will see new applications really kicking off in big quantities. I mean, steel, for example, but also in transport, we will see really by then a lot of heavy-duty transport trucks, but also maritime. We hope to get also in aviation to take the first steps by then. Also, hydrogen will be used for electricity balancing purposes. We will continue to create also hydrogen valleys. You know that we started now in the northern Netherlands with the first hydrogen valley. Germany has added 2 hydrogen valleys. The idea is that we create more hydrogen valleys, and especially if you saw the IEA report last year that was launched at the G20 in June in Japan, there it was clearly mentioned that we need to look into hydrogen valleys in ports, industrial hubs which are in ports. So you will see that in the coming years we will work a lot on hydrogen in ports, industrial hubs. But also we will need to think about cross-border logistical infrastructure. So the natural gas pipelines, to see how we can connect Northern Europe, Southern Europe, East and West through these pipelines. So that will happen in phase 2, until 2030. And then the final phase is really until 2050, where Europe has set for itself the ambition to be the first continent, I mean, to be the continent really carbon neutral. For that, we really need to scale up after 2030 to all the hard decarbonized sectors. Again, we need to expand further the hydrogen-derived synthetic fuels for some of the areas. The infrastructure network really will have to be all over Europe. And very important, I mean, maybe some people missed that, but we would like really to have an international market on hydrogen with the euro as a benchmark. So these are, I mean, really the three phases. Of course, there is also an investment agenda behind those three phases. There are several instruments in Europe. I mean, we have the Next Generation EU, and I think we all heard a lot about that in the past weekend, the long negotiations in the European Union. Finally, there is a budget on the multi-annual financial framework, but also the recovery, the Next Generation EU fund, 750 billion euro. So for sure, a lot of this money will be invested in hydrogen and the green technology, because if we can use the words what the Vice President Timmermans said, that I mean, we need to invest now in the future of our children, because we will use their money in a way. So we need to make sure that we do it right for them. So Next Generation EU, but also Invest EU, together with the EIB, will be used. We will have cohesion policies, the Innovation Fund that just launched 2 weeks ago, their call for proposal. We will have the next partnership on Horizon Europe, the next research partnership. So there will be a lot of investment agendas from the European Union. But in addition, if you look really to the numbers, we're talking big numbers. If we want to realize the ambition we have, we will need to invest between 220 to 340 billions of euro in renewable electricity production, just on the electricity. These are huge numbers. And we then look into the renewable hydrogen, we expect between 24 to 43 billion euro. For the transport, hydrogen transport, distribution and the storage, we expect around an investment of 65 billion euro. And for heavy duty and transport, around 13 billion euro, and in steel, around 8 billion euro. So these are all big numbers. And the way that all these investments will happen, this agenda, that will be made by the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. So you heard about that. One part of the clean hydrogen strategy, as I said, is these phases, but also we want to do that together with the industry, and that's why the Clean Hydrogen Alliance was built. It will have like 6 working groups on different teams, and these are really CEOs that will discuss together with the Commission on what are the regulations that we need, but also what is the investment agenda that they will try together to make it happen. So it's really a platform, and we hope to start meeting for the first time just after summer. It was now announced. Also, we think that the forum will happen normally in November. So we are planning a European Hydrogen Week from 24th to the 27th of November, where we will have the first forum of the Clean Hydrogen Alliance as well. So also internationally, Europe would like to work with many countries, because we know very well that Europe alone will not be able to produce all the hydrogen, the green hydrogen that we need. So we will need to import. And so we need to look to work with different countries on, for example, certifications of the hydrogen, on methods. I mean, for example, from Africa, some people are looking now into putting or to produce hydrogen in Northern Africa, put it in the pipelines, move it to Italy or Spain. So these are scenarios that we need to start looking at, but that's where we look at the international cooperation a lot. So many things going on the European hydrogen strategy. I can still talk for a couple of minutes, but maybe give it back the word to you.
Thanks, Bart. There certainly is a lot going on, clearly. I mean, before we move on, I would like to ask you, was the strategy everything you expected it to be? Did it deliver as hoped? Were there any surprises or perhaps even disappointments from your perspective?
From my perspective, it has everything what it needed to have. Unfortunately, at that time, they could not put any numbers on I mean, how many investments they will do, because, as I told you, only last weekend the member states agreed on the budgets. So now it will be now we will need to put budgets next to many of these initiatives. But yes, I was very surprised in a way to see such a huge ambition, because we should not forget to build 40 gigawatt of electrolyzers in Europe by 2030. This is pretty challenging. Personally, I mean, I'm in the field now already since a long time. We are now building in the megawatt scale. I mean, I know, for example, our project Jewels in the northern Netherlands with with Nurion. It's a 20 megawatt. I know how hard it is already to build a 20 megawatt. So we're talking about 100 megawatts now, but it's just talking studies. So 40 gigawatt by 2030 will be a huge challenge, and I was surprised that the Commission was so ambitious. Of course, now it will be about implementing these things. So we will have to, of course, start the next partnership on research, because I mean, one is scaling up. Another one, we still need to do cost reduction on electrolyzers, for example. We need to look into new materials. So for that, we will have a new partnership. So the fuel cells and hydrogen joint undertaking will cease to exist by the end of the year. So we will get another name next year, which calls Clean Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. The focus will mainly move to hydrogen production, hydrogen distribution, and also to heavy duty use or usage in steel and hard to abate sectors. That will have to be put in place for the next year. So we will be very busy, but also we have to start up the Hydrogen Alliance. Really, that has to start rolling and really working fine. We will have all the IPCEIs, the important projects for common European interests, that starts to develop well. That was an initiative was also taken by the Commission at the beginning of this year. So now these are huge projects across Europe, and so also that will start to contribute to the European hydrogen strategy. So plenty of job to be done, and I think to implement everything, the big challenge will be to align, I would say, because now so many initiatives will be taken, so many different instruments will start to work on hydrogen, and I think the big challenge for Europe and the Commission will be, how do we keep control on all these different initiatives, and how do we make sure they are all aligned, and that we avoid double funding, double research things. I mean, really, this will be crucial, and I have to say that I'm starting now to work on that and to try to put everything in place so that we are very lean but also very efficient at the same time.
Sure, it's definitely a busy and challenging time, definitely, but at least they are good challenges to have, good problems to have. So yeah, some really bright horizons coming up. Thanks,
Yeah,
Bart.
absolutely.
Now, as we've already alluded to, the EU hydrogen strategy comes at a time when there's a widespread chorus of support for hydrogen to be a pillar in our rebalancing or restructuring of our economies globally. Some will argue that the COVID-19 pandemic has given us enough issues to address, that the drive for sustainability is a further complication at a time when we need to just bounce back with a bang. Others, however, myself included, will argue that lockdown and one of the most challenging periods in modern history has actually given us the pause, the prompt we needed to rethink our approach and to make change for the better. Claire Johnson, co-founder and CEO of Hydrolytics, editorial advisory board member of H2View, and former CEO of the Australian Hydrogen Council, is another such advocate. And we're delighted to welcome Claire today to discuss this very topic. Claire, thanks for your time. I know we've caught you right at the end of your day where you are. Perhaps you could tell us a little about the pause that you believe we've had and this opportunity it's given us to rethink how we reposition our economies with hydrogen.
I think that, Rob, you're very right, that these past few months have absolutely given us all an opportunity to reflect. And I'm dialing in from Melbourne, where we're in the midst of a lockdown at the moment, so we may have a little bit more time than most. But in considering our world and how we want to live in the world, inevitably there's a conversation around energy. And governments and policy makers in particular really are now faced with a choice. And that choice is, do we continue to invest in traditional energy sectors, or do we look at new emerging energy as an opportunity to kickstart economies, bring back jobs and stimulate investment? And from what we've seen, and the EU, as Bart has touched on, has been very ambitious and taken a leadership role in making a decision that going down the route of clean energies is the right pathway to take in reinvigorating our economies once more. So I think internationally, we're very much looking at Europe as taking the lead in this conversation And I hope that countries such as my own, like Australia, can really start to learn some lessons from that pathway. I've been in the hydrogen sector for about 5 years now. It's not an extensive amount of time, but we really have seen some very clear iterations of hydrogen in that period. So my experience with hydrogen started when I was working at Toyota. It was quite difficult to talk to governments about hydrogen at the time. It wasn't on their radar. I was in government relations, so it's all about securing meetings with government to influence and lobby for hydrogen in this instance. So I've seen the transformation from that very difficult time back then to today, where we've seen huge groundswell and huge momentum. But we also need to be very cautious as well that there is a certain hype around hydrogen, as we're aware. But I'd say that as we're emerging from the pandemic and governments are prioritising renewable energies, and we're seeing hydrogen really being selected as the front and centre clean energy technology that they're supporting, this could be the pivotal moment that hydrogen really needs to move beyond that fuel of the future tag to actually starting to move into a very clear implementation phase. And as Bart touched on, the EU has been extremely ambitious, targeting 40 gigawatts of electrolyzers by 2030. Australia, we don't have as clear target as that, but our government is prioritising hydrogen as part of its COVID response. Our government in Australia is more of a centre-right government, so their favourite taglines right now are technology, not taxes. Fortunately, one of those technologies is hydrogen, and the other one is a gas-led recovery. So when they talk about gas-led, predominantly talking about natural gas, given we're the biggest LNG exporter in the world, but hydrogen features within that natural gas transition, of course. So I think we've all been, in some respects, even those in the sector, as Bart touched on, pleasantly surprised by the degree that hydrogen has been prioritised in COVID responses. We've also seen that in the UK today, so a massive £350 million, almost half of that has been dedicated to hydrogen. We've seen France, the association, they're asking for a certain quantum funds for hydrogen as well. We're seeing the Green New Deal in Korea. We're seeing in the US, Joe Biden's policy platform very clearly talks about hydrogen. So I think this could be that golden moment that hydrogen is always needed just to make that transition from demonstration scale and R&D to actually moving down the cost curve and achieving the scale that we need to make the sector a part of mainstream energy thinking. So it's a very exciting time for hydrogen. And I think despite the hardships that we're all going through, this could be quite transformative for it going forward.
Thanks, Claire. I couldn't agree more. And I think it'd be a great shame if we didn't take the opportunity that this has given us to learn and move forward in a more progressive manner. Do you think we will do that? Do you think there's enough of a groundswell of feeling right now? And will it be as feasible and practical as we hope to do this?
Look, I'm very confident that all of the foundation and the platform is being established to enable the sector to now make its next big move into scale. So one of the biggest issues for the hydrogen sector to date, and I think that we're at a tipping point now, has been a lack of government support in terms of co-investment, in terms of regulations and standards, in terms of settings that will create market demand. Because we don't only need to stimulate supply of hydrogen, but we also need to create a market for that hydrogen as well. So this moment in time, we're seeing governments step up to the plate and start actually pulling together those frameworks that will enable that supply of hydrogen in volume, but also will create the market levers that will actually stimulate demand for hydrogen, whether it be in industrial feedstocks, which is really one of the low-hanging fruit areas for hydrogen at the moment, whether it may be in heavy transport. Energy grid balancing is a really big issue in Australia where hydrogen is seen to be playing a key role. But one area where we may trip up and we need to be very cautious about is really around international coordination. I think ultimately we want to create an international market for hydrogen. And we're all very much focused on our own regions at the moment, and that's because we're still really in our infancy as a sector. So in Bart's instance, very much focused on building the European hydrogen sector. Here in Australia, obviously we're focused on our own market, and we're obviously moving quite quickly ahead in terms of some of the large-scale projects that are happening here. But we all need to be talking to each other and learning from one another as well. And so having that international coordination piece will be really critical so that we can scale up in the most efficient and accelerated fashion possible. And I think examples of this webinar today are a really, really good demonstration of that the lines of communication are open between different parts of the world. So let's just keep that moving so we can continue to learn from one another.
Thanks, Claire. Absolutely, and agree again. Now we move from one passionate hydrogen enthusiast to another in the shape of Martina Wettin of Nielsen Energy. Martina, we've spoken so many times before about hydrogen and why we really have to get behind it and make a difference. And I know you're 110% behind the cause too. In fact, I know you're taking a break from your holiday this week to join us today and share that enthusiasm and insight. So tell us about your belief in hydrogen and the off-grid way of life that Nielsen Energy is driving forward, because it's a pretty inspiring story, isn't it?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Rob, and the team for inviting me. We come from a really large perspective from Bart and Claire, and maybe I can add some more practical experience. Again, my name is Martina Wettin. I work as the marketing and PR director of Nielsen Energy. Also happen to be one of the founding partners, together with Mr. Nielsen himself and Pontus Lundgren. We operate out of Sweden, and Sweden is not the most progressive of hydrogen communities so far. I'd like to take this opportunity to share a bit about the proven experience that we have, but also the challenges that we face, and a bit about the identified opportunities, and talk about being driven and not diminished, because we are in an unheard of situation where we are. And I think that I'd like to underline as well that the decentralized green hydrogen part of this is really, really vital. So I'll elaborate a bit on that, if that's okay. Again, Nielsen Energy, why? Nielsen himself, going back to 2012-13, my colleague was very determined. We live in a country that's viewed as being very dark, no sun and cold. So how can you better show that it's possible to utilize the surplus of renewable energy and utilize it in an off-grid house in this environment? That includes all the mod cons you can imagine, being not having log burners all over the place, but having an ordinary house, and that has developed into being what is now our living lab. And it's been a huge benefit to be able to really understand and really work with the development of both hardware and software, so that you can deliver complete system solutions. So even though we have a tagline that says it's as simple as that, it isn't really as simple as that, because you need to be able to control and understand energy and how to utilize the batteries and the state of charge of those, and the fuel cells and the electrolyzers and all of that combination, and the software that's needed to make it simple for the customer, because I think it is really, really important for the users, the end users, that it shouldn't be anything that you have to be really, really passionate about technology. It should be as simple as that. And that leaves a gap for system integrators, and that's what we are. And I welcome any as many co-workers in that field as possible. Just very, very briefly, where we are and in the situation here, we utilize the thermal heat as well. It's a huge factor for us. So when we talk about being off-grid, that entails both electricity and heat. And we have approached that in a number of different projects. Just today, I learned that there is a professor, David Bleckman of Cal State University in Los Angeles, together with Chalmers and the Fulbright Commission, and they are actually today releasing a documentary about this kind of system solutions, and that happens to be ours. That's called The Little House That Could. And for all of those of you who remember the Thomas the Tank Engine, you remember a tank engine that could. So that will be released, and I think it's important that there is non-biased information out there who you can take part of. So I'll be happy to share those links and information if that's okay, Rob. So how will we use this experience? Well, so far, but for a number of different applications, both on the mobile side, but also on stationary applications. I started off by saying that we live in a community that's not really the pulling factor for hydrogen in Sweden so far, but we have had really early adopters on the customer side, not least municipalities like Mariestad, where the concept of Electro Village has welcomed, for instance, that we built a container-based off-grid solar-powered green hydrogen production site for a filling station. And having that possibility of building in containers, so you can have the flexibility of actually moving stuff and scaling up and down, has been really, really interesting to work on. And we foresee that as a big opportunity moving forward to add not only the local decentralized hydrogen production, but also to state that we are not doing that in competition with any grid or a competition. We are adding. And I think it's important to add. So being mobile and scalable and flexible has been important. Another really way out there application that's going on in Sweden is the 6 council house microgrid that covers about 12,200 square meters. It's 6 houses, council houses, 172 flats that have decided to go all the way of being energy sufficient for both electricity and heat. And this, for us, is quite a huge endeavor, and it's pushing many boundaries, not least when it comes to receiving permits for having storage of quite large numbers in built-up areas. But what I'd like to take the opportunity, like I said, right now, is to really underline the validity of decentralized systems, because they don't challenge, as I say, but they unload. We have, as in many countries, there are situations of bottleneck situations of the grid. We have excellent grid facilities, but sometimes the power isn't there, which limits the ability to build new production sites or new housing. And I know that there are similar situations in other countries as well. So if we can add the green hydrogen, the decentralized hydrogen, and see that as a free energy, freeing energy capacity, I think that's one vital thing to underline. Challenges. I promised to talk about challenges as well. Well, for us, it's been an unimaginable amount of red tape, really, that we had to push through. And all of 2019, we more or less just had to stop operation and really sit down and break down a lot of thresholds and really work very closely with the fire departments and the different bodies and agencies. Because we come from a situation where gas isn't, we don't use gas for cooking that much, and it's another setting that we come from. Identified opportunities, yes, massive. It's been a bit, our operation so far is quite small, but it's been mind-blowing, the amount of requests that have come to our operation from all over Europe, Australia, not least, Asia. And obviously we tend to and want to really scale up and do our contribution to the green hydrogen business as much as possible. We see preschools, we see backup systems for commercial buildings, we see fire departments that want to go off-grid. You start off by saying, Rob, that it's an off-grid situation. It doesn't have to be 100% off-grid. And that might be suitable for some applications, for some not. So the amount of being off-grid or not, or being self-sufficient, can vary, of course, and that's all to do again with being creating the most suitable system solution for the application. On other opportunities I think that we will see, and you might have mentioned that, Bart, as well, is the wind power. Wind will really come into play into this field, and that's moving very, very fast. So far, we've only used solar, but wind is there, and I'm happy to say also that the more already established power companies, at least in this country, are welcoming and want to work together with us now to build the complete infrastructure solutions that include all of the different elements that we've talked about. So I feel very positive, and like you said, Rob, we tend to be very optimistic about where we are and what's moving on. So thank you for this opportunity, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thanks, Martina. It never ceases to amaze me every time I hear about the Nielsen Energy projects and the little house, and it's great to get some more colour on the practicalities there. We spoke earlier about taking a collective pause, about using lockdown and the pandemic to rethink how we live and work. Could this off-grid template be a great part of that? Do we need to see more of these collaborative projects and community investments?
Well, I'll have you knowing that's one of the things that really taken us back as well. There is I didn't mention it, but there is a really hardcore off-grid project taking place in Sweden as well. It's called the YEAR project. And that means being 100% off-grid, both for the electricity, the heat, the water, and the wastewater. And one thing that we didn't really approach is water, because if we use the electrolyzer as a means of creating hydrogen, water is always going to be essential. So wherever we can, we'll add a closed loop solution, not least if we address the abilities, say for instance in Australia, Claire, or in Asia, where there is a lack of grid or there isn't any grid. Of course, we can also bring water into that equation and have that as a closed loop and top it up, because the water situation is just as important and just as vital part of this discussion that we have. And yes, Rob, I've been quite taken back by the fact that not least for security reasons, we are being approached. Where will you have electricity, heat, mobility? If you can store renewable energy and keep that as a vital asset, you'll be able to think and also deliver robustness or resilience to your society. So that is really, really top priorities, even here where we are in Sweden.
That's great. Thanks, Martina. And okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open to Q&A. I can see we have some questions coming in, and we'll get to those after this short message from H2View.
Thank you for joining the webinar today. Did you know that you can catch up on all of the webinars by simply visiting Gasworld TV and selecting Watch on Demand? Most recently, H2View's Rob Cockrell sits down in conversation with Oliver Bishop from Shell Hydrogen. Catch up on the exclusive at Gasworld TV today.
Welcome back. Here we are. Let's get into those questions that we mentioned. First of all, we have a question from Kai Leung, and this one's for you, Claire. It says, Claire, references made to your experience in Toyota to lobby the Japanese government. What are the takeaways to put the government on board?
I think I'll use Australia as an example as a starting point. And I think being in government relations, you become very good at learning to push particular governments' buttons. And the wonderful thing about hydrogen is because it's such a broad spectrum of benefits. So you can either play up the decarbonisation benefits or the air quality benefits. In Australia, I had a lot of success actually focusing more on the economic side. So in our country, hydrogen is being seen as potentially the next LNG. So as I mentioned before, we're the biggest exporter of LNG in the world. So it gets governments very excited when they realise that there may be a brand new commodity, export commodity on the horizon. And I think because of the economic benefits that will result from this potential export of hydrogen, that was really one of the key catalysts that saw Australia develop its national hydrogen strategy. So the economics of hydrogen are certainly there. In terms of international governments, look, it really varies across the board. In terms of the EU, obviously one of the main drivers is decarbonisation, but it's also industrial development. The EU is really sort of the heart of hydrogen equipment manufacturing worldwide at this point in time. So for that region, kickstarting a brand new manufacturing sector based on clean jobs is a key driver. The question I mentioned Japan. So for Japan, it's all about energy security. And that's why they're looking at diversification of their energy sources, and hydrogen is a potential contributor to that diversification story. So as I mentioned from the outset, the great thing about hydrogen is that you can find your arguments, because there are so many reasons for why this is the right pathway to go down.
Great, thank you, Claire. Next question is to you, Bart. And Nigel Holmes would like to ask, Bart, do you see the potential for Scotland for a massive offshore wind capacity to produce green hydrogen being a good fit for the green hydrogen supply into European industry? How might we progress this?
Well, I do believe so. I mean, that you might heard that we have a project in northern Scotland, which calls Big Hit, where basically we are producing hydrogen on the islands, and then we bring it onshore to the mainland, basically, of Scotland. I also read that recently the governments, I think UK or the UK governments, together with the Scottish government, they are planning now to invest a lot of money into infrastructure to bring even the hydrogen further down into the UK. I think this is a very good movement. But why not to Europe as well? I mean, there is a lot of wind over there. I've been there. I was surprised how much wind is continuously blowing over there. So they can produce much more energy than what they actually need there. And I think it would be a good switch between what now they have a lot of, if you take Aberdeen, for example, they have a lot of oil and gas infrastructure there. So they will need to change at some point. And it's good to see that Aberdeen has really selected hydrogen as one of the main ways to guarantee the jobs and the economics over there in that region. So I do believe strongly that Scotland could at some point bringing green hydrogen to Europe. I think it's just about what will be the amount and the costs and everything, and maybe also some kind of trade deal between the two blocks might be necessary as well at that time.
Okay, thank you. Martina, we have a couple of questions for you now. First of all, someone's asked, could you please clarify the name of the person that you referred to in LA? Was it David Beckman? And can you share the paper that you talked about?
Yes, it's David Bleckham. That's Blekhmn. And he's at CalStat in Los Angeles, California State University, in cooperation with Chalmers of Gothenburg, Sweden, and the Fulbright Commission. And the little or documentary with all the details called The Little House That Could. Right. Happy to share that if there is, you want that in writing as well, Rob.
Okay, thank you. And staying with you, Martina, somebody asked, are there any of your systems installed in the UK?
Not so far. We've had many requests, but haven't been able to deliver as per yet. But we are in this situation where we are now scaling up and joining forces with partners. So looking forward to having the first delivery in the UK.
Okay, great. Thank you. And it looks like you're very popular today, Martina. We've got another question for you coming in.
Thank you.
This is from Neil Rimmer. Neil says, Martina mentioned issues getting permits to operate. What collective are the panel aware of at an EU level to develop regulations that can be applied on a global basis? The IMO is working on these areas for marine vessels, but at present there doesn't appear to be a global focal point for large-scale storage and application. So we'll go through the panel, perhaps starting with Martina.
Yes, and that isn't really my playing field. What is very beneficial for us is being part of the Swedish Hydrogen Association, Björn Aronsson and his team. But for us, it's been a very practical situation where in our country, every single municipality has their own rescue service, and they are actually the permit getters. There are 2 different documents that need to apply or to be in order for safety regulations and that. So I foresee this being very important. I know that you, Bart, have been involved in these discussions on the EU level, and I know that America has also been very involved. So maybe you'd like to elaborate a bit on that, Bart. Thanks.
Regulation codes and standards are very important to be able to move forward on the hydrogen field. I mean, especially if we want to scale up. We are working internationally on that because I believe that if we have international standards, that will make things cheaper and also faster. We are working in the IPHE. I don't know, this is a kind of I think 19 or 20 countries working together to sharing lessons learned and also working together on regulation codes and standards. One of the things that we are doing at the moment is, for example, making sure that the methodology to calculate the CO2 leakage that you have with the various hydrogen production methods, that this at least is all over the world aligned. Because you have to imagine that once we want to trade hydrogen, for example, between Australia and Europe, I just say something, we need to make sure that the calculation of the carbon that is still leaked during the production of the hydrogen in Australia is the same way that we calculate it, so that we can trade, because Europe will say we want only green hydrogen, which is maybe this amount of CO2 still be reduced, so that this is clear. Because if we use different standards, it will be very, very difficult to trade between countries. It's just to give you one example, but the other examples is on cars and trucks. I mean, especially on trucks, we have a project now, the Project Pride, where we are working together with Japan, US, and Europe in order to establish the refueling protocols for trucks. So to make sure that if a truck is produced, for example, in Korea or in Japan and moved to Europe, that they can refuel here with the same protocols, that they don't need to change the ECUs of these trucks. So all these things we are working internationally together. I think the biggest challenge that we will have all together, and I think this is something that the international community should press on, is on the IMO, on the International Maritime Organization. They are very slow, and maritime is definitely a big opportunity for hydrogen. And but at the moment, all the ships, all the projects that we are having, and we're putting these ships on the water, they are all with prototype license. Prototype license is very expensive. It takes a long time, and depending to which authority you go, they all read it a bit differently, the rules, because there is just not simply one rule by the IMO. And I think this is something I'm pressing already since years on that IMO need to start working on making standards for ships on hydrogen. So, but yeah, it's crucial. It's crucial because if we have clear standards, it will accelerate the implementation. Otherwise, it will just hinder it, and it will be more expensive.
Sure. Claire, do you have anything to add to that?
Look, I agree with everything that's been said. Our challenge is not only do we have differences in standards between countries, but we have differences within countries themselves. So harmonisation within our own individual countries is often step one. Step two is looking further afield. We do have ISO hydrogen standards, which are consistently being updated and expanded upon. So that's very much a starting point. But for new hydrogen applications, say power to gas, for instance, we're injecting hydrogen into the grid. In those instances, there is generally a complete lack of any regulatory guidance because we just haven't done it before. So these are the challenges that we face. Fortunately, across our countries and internationally, we have huge efforts going into the regulatory development that we need to give investors certainty in hydrogen projects, but there is an enormous amount of work to take place, and it's probably one of the most urgent areas for hydrogen right now is to get those standards right.
Can I just add a wee thing there? I can't underline the value of actually bringing stuff to the market, even though it might be small. But if it exists, it also instills security for the next taker or the next investor. That has been really apparent for us. And Claire, you and I, and we share the same experience as well with the ongoing exchange between our countries that actually started with small communities reaching out to each other and connecting the world through green hydrogen. So I think, even though, I mean, what we are talking about is really a huge topic, but to break that down into actual practical steps that people can relate to, decision makers can feel secure that they can make the next decision because somebody else has done that. That's why I wanted to instill the importance of being practical as well. It might seem very small, but sometimes it's actually quite crucial.
Sure. And if we just stay with the kind of regulatory environment for a second, we've got a question from Andrew Stevenson, who asks the panel, what safety and regulatory problems do you see for hydrogen pipelines?
Maybe I can take that one. So I don't think there's a big problem on safety for pipelines. I mean, we are still doing a lot of projects now on blending, for example, hydrogen in the pipelines, but also on pure hydrogen pipelines. It already exists today. I mean, if you look into Europe, I mean, Belgium, Netherlands, we have plenty already, 100% pure hydrogen pipelines already being built. I mean, actually, in one of the hydrogen refueling stations in the Netherlands near Rotterdam is actually directly connected to a hydrogen pipeline. And so it's already there. So on safety, I'm not too much worried about that. Of course, if we will start using the current pipelines that are built for natural gas, and we want now to put in pure hydrogen in that, of course, we will need to check what is possible. But various studies have shown that it's feasible. It depends a bit on the age of your grid, but it also depends very much on the equipment. I mean, Claire was mentioning it depends very much even on the regional regulations, but it also depends on each region's infrastructure situation. I mean, if you look, for example, into Europe, the pipelines, for example, in the Netherlands, they can cope maybe with 12% of blending of hydrogen. In Belgium, it's 10%, and it depends, for example, on which the compressors that they are used, because the compressor part is the weakest part, it's the part that is, it's most sensitive now to hydrogen. The pipelines itself, the flanges and so on, it's all okay. It's really the compressor part. So, and then it depends on each country, on infrastructure, what they used at that time, how old they are. So I think, and with the gas package in Europe, they are now discussing, the European Union is discussing a new gas package. That will be part of the discussion as well. What do we allow for blending? What will be the safety regulations? It's a huge debate, and I hope that within the next 2 years, Europe will come out with a good gas package and clarify all these things. But from a theoretical or basic point of view, there is no worries about safety so far.
I could just add to that, Rob, probably one component which will be critical as well is community engagement. So in a world where we're seeing increasingly higher blends of hydrogen in natural gas pipelines that is then being used for heating and cooking, the community has to get on board. We have to achieve social license for hydrogen. So we have a number of projects that are doing demonstration scale power to gas in Australia, with that hydrogen actually being used by real life communities, real life residents. And in that instance, they've decided to call the hydrogen green gas. They did some surveying of the local community, and that was better received. So there's all these things that we need to learn as well in terms of that transition with social license and perceptions of hydrogen. We're all in the sector, so we know that any safety concerns are generally thoroughly addressed. but local communities don't necessarily know that. So education will be really critical, particularly in that space.
Indeed, because now so far it was always, in the hydrogen sector, it was always B2B, and now it will become B2C, and that's a different ballgame.
Yeah, I agree. And if I could just elaborate a bit on that as well. For us, a pipeline might be a small microgrid in a built-up area, where the piping itself is actually the microgrid, the gas pipes. And that for us will be one of the least complex. It's an 8 millimeter pipeline, 90 centimeters down in the ground. And for us, that will be the storage of energy in a built-up area might be more challenging. So all depending on how you define gas piping, I suppose.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. And now we're going to take a slightly different angle. We have a question from Luca, which asks the panel, what is the role of ammonia in the hydrogen future? Is it only to facilitate transport or otherwise?
I can start on that question. Yes, facilitating transport. So I'll talk about Australia for a moment. So ammonia is really seen as an energy vector to be able to transport hydrogen across distances, overseas. So we have about 11 projects in Australia that are targeting large-scale hydrogen export. 8 or 9 of those are actually looking at ammonia as being the transport medium to move that hydrogen overseas. So we also have a technology that was developed by our lead science agency here, which is an ammonia cracker, which means you can ship that hydrogen in the form of ammonia to Japan or Korea, say. When it gets to its destination port, that ammonia can then be put through the ammonia cracker and extract the hydrogen in high enough purity that you can use it in fuel cell cars. But I think one of the more immediate opportunities is really the replacement of grey hydrogen with green hydrogen in the production of industrial feedstocks. That opportunity probably represents low-hanging fruit, and we saw the Hydrogen Council identified it as being cost competitive in 2030. So I think that both pathways in terms of ammonia's role, green ammonia as a feedstock, but also as a transport medium for hydrogen, both will be equally as important.
In Europe, where we're looking also to use ammonia as in shipping, in the current ships that are already being built, so you'll probably need to change the fuel, and so ammonia could be really a good, let's say, a good solution for that, for shipping. Mainly for big ships. Maybe for smaller ships we can go to pure hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, but for the biggest ships ammonia is definitely an option, because it's also, from a TCO point of view, it's okay. It's possible to do it. This to add to the feedstock, of course, this is crystal clear. Where I don't see yet, and that's my view at the moment, is on the transportation, because of course you can transport your hydrogen with ammonia, and then I see it rather that the ammonia will be used or in shipping, but also, for example, for energy production directly in turbines. So you can just burn it in the turbine, generate electricity or something like that instead of natural gas. Of course, you will still need to do some after treatment system after the burning of the hydrogen. But it is there I see a huge potential. Whether to make it back to hydrogen and then use it for your fuel cells, cars or trucks, that's something I'm not sure if we will be able to do it really at this moment at big scale. Probably it will take still a long time to find really. I know that Australia has that technology, but to make it really at the big scale, I'm not sure at this moment. It will take some time still. So feedstock definitely replacing shipping, as a fuel for shipping, a fuel for turbines to produce electricity. There I see potential at the moment.
Fantastic, thank you. We have so many questions coming in, which is exactly what we want. It's about the discussion and debate. I'm going to come back to you now, Claire. We have a question from Amy Halliday, and Amy asks, does your consultancy consider systemic change that will come with the hydrogen economy?
Well, as we know, hydrogen represents a systems play. It is the ultimate sector coupler So the disruption that hydrogen presents to the wider energy, transport sectors is something I think in working in the space, you realise that it's inevitable that you will have to touch on different areas. So yes, in my consultancy, I assist industry and governments to navigate the hydrogen economy and to identify opportunities, both from a project perspective, but also policy and regulation. And inevitably, when working together, we'll start identifying cross-sectoral issues or opportunities due to the very nature of hydrogen being that ultimate connector. So yes, I'm really pleased that while hydrogen has very much been looked at in isolation by governments to date with very targeted programs solely for hydrogen demonstration project deployment in the main, now we're seeing strategies like the EU where their systems integration strategy has hydrogen at its core. So hydrogen is being integrated into broader energy policy, environmental policy, transport policy. It's starting to be recognised that it is really that critical tool to link all of those sectors together. So yes, it is something that I explore very regularly.
Great, thank you. Now we've got a question for you, Martina. This comes from Rehi in Stockholm. I hope I got your name right, Rehi. Rehi says, I'm listening to you from Stockholm. I'm happy to see the enthusiasm happening around hydrogen in Sweden, slowly but steadily. Are we focusing much on green and blue hydrogen now? Do grey hydrogen find new roles here?
I'd say that, well, I'm biased in this, obviously. But I foresee the green hydrogen very strongly. And I think it has to do with our tradition as well. If we just bound a bit more westward, blue hydrogen in Norway, for instance, might be more of a on the table kind of discussion. So. But I think I mentioned in my wee speech, I'm not quite sure, but I think that wind power will play a greater role than we can imagine, and it will go fast. We see that now. Many requests and people who have earlier invested in wind power are very keen to look into the asset of hydrogen as a resource as well. So just to elaborate on what Claire also said, again, going back to the more decentralized, I think that it's vital when we do a change, in any change that we do on technology, it's not going to be 100%. It's not going to be black or white. It's going to be a gradual transition. So my perspective, what I'd like to add is that if you can have look into, not least where we are now in the corona pandemic, look at the resources that's available where you are, and utilize them in a combination, in a system solution, as well as you can to the application at hand. I think that will be a very strong movement. We didn't mention the agricultural side either when we talked about ammonia, for instance, on fertilizers, and we see that as a strong movement as well from the agricultural side, to be able to be independent, utilize where you are, what you are, to be able to produce food emission-free, produce mobility emission-free, produce fertilizers emission-free or CO2-free. Huge elaboration on your question from the Swedish side. Sorry, couldn't help myself.
That's fine. That's what we want. It's great to have this discussion. Claire, you mentioned, I believe, the Hydrogen Council and the cost competitive study earlier. A question perhaps for you and Bart here from Kamar. Is there a baseline cost for hydrogen per kg, which the market should be aiming for it to become competitive with diesel?
So I'll take Australia as an example. Our leading economic stretch target for low emission energies at the moment is for hydrogen, and that our stretch target in our country is to so hydrogen $2 per kilogram is what we're aiming for. And that is more so from a large-scale deployment of hydrogen from an export opportunity. So $2 a kilo of hydrogen would absolutely see cost competitiveness with diesel. So that is what we're working towards. Australia is trying to achieve that cost competitiveness of hydrogen across a range of applications, which can only be achieved through scale. What we're seeing in the US at the moment, which California, which has one of the largest footprints of hydrogen refueling stations in the world, is actually reached cost competitiveness with diesel right now. And they've done that through expanding their station footprint, expanded the number of vehicles on the road, and scaling up their production of hydrogen. So from a mobility perspective, we're pretty close to being competitive with diesel right now, but we need to be better than that. We need to bring our costs down further so that more consumers start looking at hydrogen as an economic pathway for mobility. So we're heading in the right direction. We still have a long way to go, but the cost curves and through entities such as the Hydrogen Council, we've seen analysis from Bloomberg recently as well, will indicate that we'll reach cost competitiveness across a range of applications by around 2030.
Yeah, in Europe, maybe just to talk about Europe. So our vision is that we need to get hydrogen at the pump somewhere at 5.5 euro the kilo to 6 euro the kilo. Today it's still much more expensive. It's always between 9 to 10 euro for a kilo. So it means that if we can get to 5.5 euro that for a kilo, because with a kilo you can drive 100 kilometers with your car. So you have to think like that, comparing it to the diesel. How many liters you would need. So with 5.5 euro, you would be definitely cheaper than a diesel car. So the way to get there is, of course, as was already mentioned, scaling up. But for us, is also to get the cost of renewable electricity down, because at the end, we need to go to green hydrogen. And this is crystal clear. The blue hydrogen can be used as a transition phase to generate the market, to open up the market. But at the end, it has to be green. So we need to get down to prices easily to get 20 euro per megawatt hour for renewable energy. Today we have that in some countries in Europe. If you go to Portugal, for example, they are quite they are getting there. If we get those prices, we can easily produce it for you can bring it, because your production will go around 2 euro the kilo, but then you still need to transport it to bring to your hydrogen refueling station. So if we get in the area of a production 2 euro, you can get it easily 5.5 euro at the pump. So the point is that we don't have yet everywhere in Europe these prices for renewable energy. So we need to get down on that one first. Scale will be, of course, important. And yeah, as soon as we have more and more renewable energy, also the prices will go down. I mean, the auctions have in Europe, the auction system that we have been doing since many years now have been very successful. It brought down the cost of wind power so dramatically, and that was only a good thing. We need to go further on that, because we should not forget that 80% of the cost of hydrogen is the renewable electricity price. The capex on your electrolyzer and these things is only 20%, more or less. So it is the electricity price that we need to get down. And that's why in the European hydrogen strategy, they also make this link to the investments that is necessary for the wind power.
Great, thank you. We're just going to try and get through a few more questions if we can. While we're on that topic of diesel and hydrogen and competitiveness, we do have a transportation question that's come in from Paul Kim. Paul says he sees a growing number of newly IPO'd truck manufacturers on the stock exchanges, and he reads a lot in interviews about the trucks rather than the infrastructure. Do our panel have any thoughts on the readiness of the hydrogen transport and truck industry?
It's here. It's probably the most important point. Some of you may have seen the video of the Hyundai trucks landing in Switzerland last week. They'll be deploying over 1,500 trucks in total. So those vehicles are real. They're on the roads. We're seeing really exciting developments from Nikola as well. We have two hydrogen companies in Australia, one called H2X, another one called Hyzon. I call it Australian. One of the founders is Australian, but they're setting up manufacturing facilities in the US. But I think we're going to see hydrogen trucks become a much bigger part of the hydrogen mobility landscape. As we know, it's been largely around passenger cars and buses to date, to a lesser degree, but we know about the enormous opportunity to decarbonise transport through hydrogen is through heavy trucking. So I think all of the stars are aligning. The technology is now being commercialised, that we'll start to see volumes expanding around the world, with Europe as a starting point. The biggest challenge for other countries is around emission standards. So emission standards for heavy vehicles is very inconsistent across the world. Europe has those standards. Other countries are going to have to follow suit. That will really be a key driver to see more hydrogen-powered heavy vehicles on roads around the world.
Exactly. I mean, the targets that Europe has set for 2030, the emissions targets are cannot be met by the truck OEMs without hydrogen. This was crystal clear. They need hydrogen to get there. Most of the OEMs, they think about 70% of the fleet, the entire fleet, can be on hydrogen. The other 30% could be on batteries. Because especially when you do the big intercity, I mean, Paris-Rome, Paris-Berlin, for example, impossible to do it with the battery trucks. You need to have the hydrogen. So we have in Europe Iveco now working very much on hydrogen trucks. Also VDL, it's another one. Yes, we have the Hyundai trucks already. Hyzon has made a joint venture in the northern Netherlands with Holzhausen. Was announcement last week. So they will start producing trucks there. We have Daimler has made a joint venture with Volvo to make hydrogen trucks. So yeah, it's really moving. Still, I believe it will take a few years before they are there with a big amount of trucks. We will see some demonstrations. Of course, the Hyundai in Switzerland, this is big. It's 1,600 trucks now they will put there. But this is because also the regulatory framework is very, very good for putting hydrogen trucks over there, because they save around 100,000 euro per year per truck on taxes, so road taxes. So if you calculate that, well, your case is made very quickly. Unfortunately, this is not in the rest of Europe. So Switzerland is very unique in that sense. So we need to, because the road taxes for trucks in other countries are very low. And so it would never make the same business case like you have in Switzerland. So we need to bring just down the cost of these trucks and these fuel cell stacks through research, innovation, and scaling up.
I've got a background from the industry as well, so I have a huge amount of respect for the complexity of these projects. But what I foresee is that the overarching infrastructure or the business cases or the business logic needs to be extended so that it includes the infrastructure as well, not only the physical vehicles themselves. And naturally, the heavier the vehicle, the more logic to using hydrogen as a vector. But I foresee, and I'm being optimistic when it comes to that, I think that push needs to happen. That logic needs to happen. So I think that we'll be seeing unexpected corporations in the near future where that actually happens. That equation becomes true.
Absolutely, thank you. And I'm going to funnel down into two final questions now. Bart, I think they're both geared towards you, but obviously we can expand it out if we'd like to. They're both concerning studies. Neil Rimmer asks, on the subject of hydrogen and ammonia for shipping, have BART and the EU carried out any feasibility and risk studies on bunkering either cryogenic hydrogen or ammonia at crowded ports in Europe? Governments are installing refueling stations for land vehicles. What about the large ships?
So we are working on that. To be very honest, it will be part of our mandate from next year. So we will start, as I told you, the next Clean Hydrogen Partnership will be mainly on hydrogen storage, on hydrogen distribution and production. So bunkering will be definitely one of the big part of our investigations we will need to do. What we have done is a TCO study on which are the different fuels that we can use in shipping. And their ammonia was quite good, I mean, even better than, for example, methanol. When we go to the shop, to the smaller ships, you can maybe use the gas, a pure hydrogen gas in form, but also liquid will have some role to play, because you can put more hydrogen quantity in a short volume. Although for distribution of hydrogen across the seas, but really, I mean, in big tanks, bulk, and in liquid form will be pretty difficult, I think, at the moment. I mean, the technology is not really there yet. It's very expensive. So although Japan have done it with first ship now, but it's really small. If you look at it, it's a very small tank that they build in. But if you really talk like LNG tankers, like we have them today, we want to move to hydrogen tankers. It's a liquid form. So how do you keep the isolation to keep the hydrogen cool? You need to have a lot of nitrogen inside as well. So I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done there. But okay, that's why we are here.
Okay, and your final study question, Bart. Roberto Cremonese asks, there is no doubt that hydrogen will have a huge development and a very transversal use. The big thing he sees is compression, using large compressors that increase the capex costs, maintenance costs, and energy consumption. Are there studies in this regard to solve the problem of the compressors?
Well, it's not only studies. I mean, we don't do studies anymore. We have a lot of projects on new compression methodologies. Yes, electrochemical compression is, for example, one. There is one good company in the Netherlands who quite is advanced in this area. We are funding a lot of projects on new compression technologies, because we know that indeed within a hydrogen refueling station or general, that's the weakest part of the system, is the compression. And we need to work on that, and a lot of research money is going into that. So not any more studies, real stuff. We are trying new methodologies. We are building these stations. We are trying them out really to get practical experience on the reliability of these new compression methodologies. And you can find them on our website, all these projects.
Okay. And in our basement, we are trying out new technology as well. So you're more than happy to contact me as well on that subject.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
It's really a general concern all over the world, because when we discussed, I mean, we have sometimes workshops also with the DOE in the US, and also there, it's exactly the same results. Compressors are one of the weakest points. So it's really a global issue that we should all tackle together, and we're working with the various countries as well, try to solve it.
That's a great message to round up our Q&A with, and it's great to hear that the practical side of things, which has clearly underpinned a lot of this webinar today. And that concludes our webinar. I don't know about you, but I'm leaving this virtual gathering full of the infectious enthusiasm of our panel, and in no doubt about the role that hydrogen has to play in this post-COVID world. Thanks once again to all of our panelists today. That's Bart and Claire and Martina. For clearly going the extra mile in the name of hydrogen, whether that's squeezing us into your busy schedule, staying up into the early hours, or taking a break from your holiday. We thoroughly appreciate it here at H2View, and I'm sure that our viewers and listeners do too. And on that note, we look forward to welcoming you back next week when we continue the discussion and debate around the subject of scale up and how we get to that vision of the hydrogen fueled future that we've talked about today. Until then, thanks for your time. Goodbye.